Guns N' Roses is without a doubt one of the most successful bands of all time. The band has sold over 100 million albums worldwide. Their debut record, Appetite for Destruction, is widely regarded as one of the greatest albums of all time in any genre, and the band has written some truly classic songs. The band, though, of course, is also known for its very destructive nature, from overdoses, lawsuits, riots, and of course, lineup changes. So today, we are going to take a look at the various Guns N' Roses lineups throughout the decades. It's important to note that there were a few people in the band prior to the release of Appetite, most notably, of course, Tracy Guns of LA Guns, but what we're really focusing on here is the lineup changes after the band found success. Anyways, starting from the release of Appetite for Destruction in 1987, which of course features the classic lineup of Axl Rose, Slash, Duff McKagan, Izzy Stradlin, and Steven Adler. Up until now, there have been over 20 members in and out of the band, with Axl, of course, being the only constant. It's also important to note that the core lineup only appears on Appetite, the Lies EP, and on one song of Use Your Illusion 2, which of course is Civil War. The drums on the rest of that record and all of Illusion 1 are from Matt Sorum, who of course replaced Steven Adler. Aside from switching drummers, the only other deviation from the core lineup for the Illusion albums was adding keyboardist Dizzy Reed in 1990, who, aside from Axl, is the longest-standing member of GNR and the only remaining member of the Illusion era up to the reunion with Slash and Duff in 2016. In the middle of the absolutely massive Use Your Illusion tour, Izzy Stradlin abruptly quit the band just shy of 2 months after the Illusion albums were released. And there were previous signs of turmoil with Izzy and the band, most notably in the video for the song Don't Cry, which features a sign that says, "Where's Izzy?" Izzy has noted his absence in the video by saying, quote, "I didn't have any say in it and I didn't want to be in it." When discussing Izzy's exit in an interview, Slash told MTV, "It got to the point where he didn't want to be involved in the amount of work that it took and the amount of stress and energy and sleepless nights it took to keep it going so that it didn't fall apart. So he just bailed, and we took that really personally." In a follow-up interview, Izzy responded to Slash's claims by saying, quote, "I got no problem really with touring. I think I got a bad rap on all that." When asked by interviewer Kurt Loder what the actual story was, he responded, "I had a bus, they had a plane, and I beat them to the gig. You get to the point to where you're like, am I going to carry on like this or am I not? You know? So I said, I'm not." Izzy went on to add that his main issue within the band was Axl, whom he had been friends with since they were both kids growing up in Indiana, saying, quote, "I tried talking to him during the Illusion albums. If we had a schedule here, come in at a certain time. And he completely blew up at me. There is no fucking schedule. There was one song on that record that I didn't even know was on it until it came out, My World. I gave it a listen and thought, what the fuck is this? But Axl made it clear that he was going to do things his way and there was no space for debate. So I had to make it clear to everybody that that was the end of the line for me." Izzy was replaced, of course, by the excellent Gilby Clarke, who would remain in the band until they started to full-on implode just a few years later in 1994. His only studio recording with GNR was on the groundbreaking, monumental covers album, The Spaghetti Incident, which I guess in all honesty, it's not really that bad. And if you don't know, it also features a cover of Charles Manson's Look at Your Game Girl, which, love it or hate it, is honestly a pretty ballsy move. In December of '94, GNR released a cover of the Rolling Stones classic Sympathy for the Devil, which featured Axl's friend Paul Tobias on guitar, replacing Gilby. And to be quite honest, Paul is, in a way, the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say, when it comes to the departures of Slash, Duff, and Matt Sorum. Unhappy with Paul Tobias being a part of the band, Slash eventually said to everyone, "Either Paul goes or I go." And Slash was gone by October of 1996, but not before both he and Duff signed away their rights to the name all the way back in 1992, with Slash saying, quote, Axl refused to go on stage one night during the Use Your Illusion tour in 1992 unless the band signed away the name rights to the band. Unfortunately, we signed it. I didn't think he'd go on stage otherwise. Axl, of course, completely denied this claim, saying, quote, "It never happened, all made up, fallacy and fantasy. Not one single solitary thread of truth to it. Had that been the case, I would have been cremated years ago legally, could have cleaned me out for the name and damages. It's called under duress with extenuating circumstances." I also want to note that contrary to what most people think, the Sympathy for the Devil cover is actually not the last recording to feature classic era Guns N' Roses members together. That would actually be on an album called Anxious Disease by the band called The Outpatients, which was West Arkeen's band. And it may actually be worth doing an entire video on West Arkeen, because if you're unfamiliar, he's been long associated with the band all the way back to the beginning and co-writing some of their most classic songs. Tragically, though, he passed away in 1997. Anyways, following Slash's departure in October of '96, Matt Sorum would eventually be fired from the band in April of 1997 over an argument about, you guessed it, Paul Tobias. In an interview in 2001, Matt recalled leaving the band, saying, quote, "Me and Axl had an argument, and I said, you should get Slash back, and we should put the band back together. Get out there and do it. He was like, I don't need Slash. And I said, well, I think you do. And he asked me, are you going to quit? And I said, no, I'm not going to quit. And he said, well, you're fired. So I left, and I remember walking out the door, and I went back to my 6-level palatial estate where I was producing a band called Candlebox. They were in my house. And I said, I've just been fired from Guns N' Roses. And we sat down and we celebrated. It's also important to note that at one point, Matt Sorum referred to Paul Tobias as the Yoko Ono of Guns N' Roses. Duff was the final classic-era member to leave in August of 1997. In his autobiography, he says, Guns had been paying rent on studios for 3 years now, from 1994 to 1997, and still did not have a single song. The whole operation was so erratic that it didn't seem to fit with my hopes for parenthood and for stability. Nothing against Paul Tobias, but Jesus Christ, imagine being the guy responsible for 2 key members of Guns N' Roses, one of the biggest bands in the world, leaving. Of course, he shouldn't bear all of that weight, as you could certainly say the same about Axl, but I digress. The quote-unquote new version of Guns N' Roses finally emerged in 1998 after Axl had purchased all the rights to the band, with Tommy Stinson of The Replacements on bass, touring Nine Inch Nails guitarist Robin Fink, homewrecker Paul Tobias, of course, on rhythm guitar, Dizzy Reed remaining on keyboards, multi-instrumentalist Chris Pittman, and drummer Josh Freese, who has quite the resume, playing with The Perfect Circle, Devo, Weezer, Paramore, and a slew of others. From that point up until the sort of pseudo-reunion in 2016 with Slash and Duff returning to the fold, it really has been a revolving door of members constantly in and out of the band. When the extremely long-awaited and highly, highly underrated album Chinese Democracy finally came out in 2008, there were a total of 12 different GNR members that appeared on the record, and some of them hadn't even been in the band for a number of years before the record was released. You have 5 guitarists, Robin Fink, who appears on all of the songs, Buckethead, who by that point hadn't really been in the band for about 4 years. He was in from 2000 to 2004, and he appears on a majority of the album. Paul Tobias plays on most of the songs, and Bumblefoot, who was actually in the band for quite a while, from 2006 to 2014, he appears on all of the songs as well. The 5th guitarist on the record is Richard Fortus, who has been in GNR since 2002 and still is to this day, and he's actually the 3rd longest serving member of GNR, only behind Axl and Dizzy Reed. The only notable GNR guitarist to not appear on Chinese Democracy was DJ Ashba from 6 a.m. with Nikki Sixx, and DJ was actually the last guitarist in the band prior to Slash rejoining. Josh Freese is credited for some arrangements on the album, Tommy Stinson playing bass on most of the songs, both Chris Pittman and Dizzy doing keyboards, and drummers Brain, who also collaborated on other projects with Buckethead, and current drummer Frank Ferrer, both appearing on the album. The credits for the record are just absolutely insane, a tremendous amount of musicians, and a similar sized list of people involved with production of the record. Parts of the classic era lineup would eventually reunite in 2012 when the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But of course, Izzy, Axl, and Dizzy wouldn't show up. But Slash, Duff, Steven Adler, and Matt Sorum all partook, bringing along Gilby Clarke too, although he wasn't included in the inductions. They performed a few classics from Appetite and had Alter Bridge and Slash's solo band singer Miles Kennedy fill in for Axl, and obviously he is way more than capable. Finally, in 2016, Slash and Duff would rejoin Axl and Guns N' Roses, along with Dizzy Reed, Richard Fortus, Frank Ferrer, and newcomer Melissa Reese on keys along with Dizzy. Throughout the initial reunion dates, Steven Adler appeared to play a few songs in a few different cities, but that's about the extent of his involvement. And supposedly, Izzy was offered a spot in the reunion, but according to him, the band did not want to split the money equally. He also allegedly did a sound check with them at one point, and he was going to make an appearance sort of in the same capacity as Steven, but he disappeared before showtime. This current lineup is probably the closest we will ever get to a full-blown reunion, but I've seen the show a couple of times, and it is 100% worth seeing. Axl is sounding great, the band is firing on all cylinders, and they're playing a career-spanning set, including some reworked versions of some stuff from Chinese Democracy, the two new songs, Absurd and Hard School, and they even throw in Slither from Velvet Revolver. They're constantly on tour, and it's definitely worth checking out when they're near you. Before we wrap this up, though, I do want to mention something. I have always thought it was a little bit unfair that Guns N' Roses constantly gets lumped in a lot of times with all of the 80s hair bands, and nothing against those bands whatsoever. Me personally, I'm a huge 80s hair guy, but to me that is just not GNR. Guns N' Roses, especially on Appetite for Destruction, which is the only full length they even released in the 80s, as Lies was just an EP, but they've always been far more Aerosmith and just straightforward hard rock. And Cinderella is actually another band that gets lumped in with the hair bands that I feel is also a little bit outside of the hair metal wheelhouse. All right, though, I gotta run because much like Axl likes to toss mic stands, my fiance is waiting for me to go toss something of hers, so I gotta go. But thanks so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you next time.